Hello friends, welcome back to another video. So in this video, I will give a walkthrough of the execution process for REST API request, including where it starts, the functions involved, how the WP REST server class manages the request, how the WP REST request class object is created to store the information about the API request, how the REST class sends the response, and how the registered REST route endpoints are identified based on the REST API requests, and much more. We will also talk about the filters and actions that are used and executed during this process. As we saw in our last video, the REST API loaded function will be executed on the past request action. We will get the REST route. In the REST route, we will either have a slash, which is the base for WP JSON base REST API URL, or if we are executing or requesting a post request like WP slash v2 slash post, then we will have that route information in the REST route. After defining this constant, the REST get server method will be executed. As we saw in our last video, this function will return an object of WP REST server. Here, the REST API init action is executed with the do action. We will use this action to register our callback function and add a custom REST route. We will talk more about on registering the custom REST route in upcoming videos. Going back to our REST API loaded function, will return a WP REST server object. Then it will check whether the REST route is empty or not. If it's empty, it will remove the trailing slash and then it will be a base route. If it's not, then we will have a specific request for the REST route. For example, if I echo this route by sending a request here, it will give me slash wp slash v2 slash posts. If I remove this from here, so it will just serve the WP JSON base. So this route will be passed to the serve request method of the WP REST server class. If you go to the serve request method, we are first checking whether the current user exists or not, whether they are logged in or not, and then it applies a filter to enable or disable REST JSON-P for compatibility with old browsers. By default, it's enabled, but if you want to disable it, you can use this filter. Then it will send a few headers and few other things like links for pagination. If you check the link for headers, you can see that the link will be used for the next request. A couple of headers, including the content type, will be set to text/HTML. So the header will be set for the current request. You can also expose these headers if needed and filter or add custom headers for CORS, that is cross-origin resource sharing requests. You can filter and modify these headers accordingly. Then these headers will be added and sent. You can also allow REST allowed CORS headers, which filters the list of request headers that are allowed for REST API CORS request. If needed, you can add a no cache header and check whether the user is logged in or not. These are a couple of filters you can use to modify the request headers. Then we check whether the REST API is enabled. This is a deprecated filter from version 4.7. Instead of disabling the REST API with this filter, you can use the REST authentication error filter to restrict access to REST API. For example, if you don't want to allow even the read access, that is get methods for other users or services, you can do that with the REST authentication errors filter. This filter is deprecated, so it should not be used anymore as it will throw a deprecation warning and may be removed in the future versions. The method will then create a WP REST request class object using the method pass, which should get a get method in this case, and the route will be the path info. The class object will be used to set the query parameters from the query string. It will be the get body method. Then set the body params if any payload data is passed via the post object. Then handle file parameters if any files are being uploaded. Then it will set headers and body for the raw data. So this information will be used to set the request class object. The underscore method will override the HTTP method if provided. As discussed in the first video, if we set it, it will override the header. It is also important to check authentication at this point. This function doesn't do much else. It just applies the filter to check if the current user has permission for the given REST API request. For example, if you want to disable even reading of data via REST API request, you can simply return false to this filter and this would prevent the access. For example, in our movie library plugin, I have added a filter and attached a callback function for it. I'll pass a WP error to this filter with the message being you are not allowed to access the API. Now, if I send a request to this, I'll get an error that will be preventing me the access to access the REST API with the message that we had passed. This filter can be used for authentication mechanisms like OAuth, application passwords, JSON web tokens, or basic authentications to return true or a WP error object for authentication. The default is null. So this filter is very useful for authentication and disabling REST API requests. Assuming there is no error, we can call the dispatch method with the request class object. Dispatching means that it will execute the REST API request. Instead of executing the default callback function to prepare the response for the given REST API request, you can use the REST pre-dispatch filter. If you return non-empty data, it will return the result without executing this function. If the pre-dispatch is not used, the match request to handle function will be called. This function will check the method and get the route, take the namespace, and the regex expression will be done. It will loop through all the registered routes and then their handlers. This is the get routes method. This will simply return all the routes so you can have REST endpoints as well. You can filter them if you want, and then it will simply prepare the route and the methods and return it. It will loop through all the registered routes and match the current one. If it matches, it will check the callback function and validate the parameters and arguments. If everything is valid, it will return the callback function to send the response. If no route is found, it will return a WP error indicating no matching route. If you try a non-existing route, you will get an error message saying no route was found matching this URL. It will also check the validity and sanitation of parameters, which will be covered when we register a custom route. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Jai WordPress.